Good day and welcome. I am Dr. David Checha, and this is Small Insight, Big Impact. Today, I want to talk to you about something familiar, something deeply respected, and something almost every organization claims to practice, and that's continuous improvement. It is in quality systems, management systems, operational excellence, health sector, sustainability, name them. It's part of every organization, every action that we all try to do. It is a phrase everywhere, and at the center of it sits one of the most well known cycles or frameworks in modern management, which is plan, do, check, and act. PDCA. The PDCA is an elegant framework. It's very simple to use, and it has shaped decades of improvement in work and processes and systems. And yet, many organizations run PDCA cycles for years, and they are still experiencing similar or the same type of failures. In some situations, they're the same recurring problems. Others, some transformation initiatives have stalled. And in other organizations, too, new issues or new problems have surfaced. So today, I want to offer a leadership grade reframing of the PDCA. It is not about rejecting the PDCA, but it is about suggestion improvements that will help it become more up to date. And that's the SiBI upgrade. And this is because the world has changed, systems have moved on, and issues have become very complex, more or less. And these days, we see risk all over the place, interconnected with other actions, and people are stretched at the workplace or at home. All these factors are in some way not very well captured in the PDAC. So that's why I'm presenting to you. And the thing is, I feel that improvement frameworks should become more of a perception tool and also a judgment one. It also has to touch on stewardship and all that reflected or being part of the other components of the PDAC. So today I introduce a model built on modern leadership, in my opinion, and which is sense, interpret, decide, and adjust. Sense, interpret, decide, and adjust. And this is what I call the SiBI improvement cycle. So let's talk through it together. The first one, I say sense, is just about you taking time to notice the reality before naming the problem. Be aware of your surroundings, your environment, and then you'll be in a better position to name the problem. And with this, the first step in the cycle, which is the sense, has to be intentional. Intentional because improvement does not begin only with planning. I believe improvement begins with attention. Paying attention to your surrounding, what is happening, drawing clues out of that, and then you'll be in a better position to define the problem. In many organizations that I've worked in and others, improvements often starts with meetings, templates, action plans, initiatives, or where there's a major problem that has to be solved. But in lived experience, the deepest improvement I have seen Does not start with documentations or with meetings, or they start when you get to notice your surroundings. We are able to see weak signals and also identify quiet friction points in teams and in processes. Pay particular attention to frontline hesitations in work processes. Identify patterns that do not yet have language in your operating systems or processes. Conducting audits of different forms and shapes. So, I have learned that system speaks long before we start documenting issues that relates to problem. In most cases, the dashboard, it's often late, or probably if it is current, the updates are always not on time. Reports are always filtered to meet current demands or issues that are of concern to management and people. But the reality is always present. Sense means initially scanning the system around you and seeing what is emerging. And it means asking very critical questions, such as where is the stress accumulating quietly in the system? What feels stable and what doesn't? What are people talking about or not discussing in the workplace that you feel are important? And what risk is forming beneath the surface, or what is actually boiling in the organization in processes that you are not aware of or you are not paying attention to? So sensing is actually an active observation, not a passive one. And it's just basically saying that leadership has to be present in all forms: your eyes, your ears, your senses, everything. So in other words, sensing, which is the first step, I am saying it's a discipline of paying attention before rushing to designing or identifying a problem. Because planning assumes we are already ready and we perfectly or somehow understand the problem. And without having a good sense of what exactly is happening, it's always difficult to be at that stage. So sensing admits that we are still learning, that the problem is true, and that humility is where improvement begins. So that's the first stage of continuous improvement that I am putting across to you to think about. The second stage that I'm also putting forward is to interpret. And this is basically turning information into understanding for others to understand more or less. So after you've sensed the situation, there comes the second step where you have to interpret. Most organizations today, have a lot of data. There's no shortage in data in most cases, I must say. Yes, there might be problems with some of the quality of data or the frequency of the data. But then overall, I think it's fair to say that most organizations have data. And this data is normally presented as dashboards, key performance indicators in audit reports, analytics, visual and catchy analytics. So yes, data is always available. But the fact of the matter is having data alone is not the meaning. You need to be able to draw meaning from the data. And that's where sometimes some agencies get it right, others don't. So it's important to make sure you have a good interpretation of the information and data that you have as leaders and making sense of what the system is telling you or the system is producing. Because this is where improvement deepens. So basically, interpretation asks questions like what pattern is actually informing and what is driving the behavior under the procedure or the processes that you are actually seeing. What assumptions are no longer valid and what trade-offs are being made silently that you are not observing or taking note of. What is the system designed to produce and what is it that it's actually producing? And in my experience, the most valuable lessons really comes from the metrics, comes from interpreting the senses that you've picked up as part of your work. So, interpretation comes from the tension between expectation and reality. Interpretation requires reflection, it also requires dialogue, judgment, and most importantly, as interpretation, we should be careful in outsourcing interpretation, particularly in terms of using spreadsheets and others, because we lose the connection between the sensing and then the interpretation when we do that in most cases. Thus, interpretation is not a technical step. In some way, some forms you can say that, and it's more of a leadership responsibility where improvement is believed to come from wisdom. So, without interpretation, organizations will normally find themselves busy, but busy for what? That's the big question that you have to answer. But with interpretation, organizations, you become very much aware of what is happening around you and with you in every situation you find yourself. So that's the second stage of continuous improvement that I am putting across to you to think about. The third one is to decide. And here, the idea is for you to choose deliberately. You don't just auto-choose, but you think through your choices and you are deliberate and intentional about your decision, your choices. And that's the third cycle of the SiBI improvement framework that I'm proposing. So, decide, and this is where many improvements efforts lose discipline, because it is a critical stage, I must say, because if you don't choose well, you miss out on the right choices. Organizations often move from insight to reaction. That's what you see, especially when there's external pressure or the environment calls for that to be able to address urgent and immediate issues. There are always concerns that runs into activities, observations that sort of are moved into interpretations or implementation, and improvements into movements. What we have to remember is improvements, it's basically judgments that have been actioned. And that also determines the quality of what we do or our decisions and improvement actions. So when you decide, it means you are choosing deliberately, and it means you are asking questions that are relevant to what is happening. For instance, what is a small intervention that teaches us the most biggest or impactful answers? What decisions do we hold when pressure comes? What are we actually testing? Sometimes you might be working on something, but not necessarily doing the right thing or testing the right thing. So those are things that you need to be very clear about when it comes to decision. And then the other aspect that is often a big gap is who owns the actions. Sometimes there are certain actions that are left in between. You can't directly tag that action to a particular person. So it's always very important to make that very clear. So those are questions that at the decision-making stage, you need to clearly answer. And then what are the structural changes that are expected from your decision? Or are they going to be cosmetic changes? These are things that you need to flesh out at that stage to be able to make sure that there's nothing or almost everything within your decision-making cycle, you've covered that. Bear in mind that you're dealing with complex systems, and so your first decision, it's always very important. And you can't afford to make that, to make a wrong decision, because it takes a lot of resources and effort to correct every decision that you make. Or every experimental move that you make. Thus, learning is very important at this stage. And you need to make sure you have control actions that are designed to reveal how the system operates and also how the system behaves and responds to your behavior. This is where leadership maturity comes in. It takes a lot of experience, skill, knowledge, and all risk, all combined to be able to get this right. Because many people can take actions, but then few people can actually decide well. Let me use that word. Why? Because decisions change or shapes, culture and trust, and also the direction of what it's been done or is planned to be done in every organization. So this is a very important stage that I think we need to pay attention to. So the SiBI improvement cycle places decision at the center of improvement because activities without judgment, it's somehow not the best because it creates an atmosphere of confusion and, for the lack of better word, I can say noise in this case. So decision with discipline is what we need, and that is what I would refer to as progress. The last and the fourth stage is adjust, and here it's basically changing the system, not the symptoms, going down into how the system operates and not just looking at the cosmetic systems and trying to adjust or improve that. That's the final stage. And this is why improvement becomes lasting. You're thinking futuristic, you're thinking long-term, you're thinking all aspects of the system that will help it function now and beyond. What you see is too often organizations respond to recurrent issues with local or short-term fixes. And this is not out of place. It's also based or aligned with the way organizational resources actually use or plan. Cycle, people are moved around, resources are changed. So it is very important to make sure that that thinking or that approach, it's changed. What we need to be looking at is what are the procedures that we need to consider, and what are the trainings that are actually very relevant to what we are trying to improve. And what reminders and memos are we seeing or are we not paying attention to? It is very important to remember that repeated outcomes are rarely produced by isolated systems because it's a combination of different actions and different posts that results in mistakes. And these are produced normally not from the system, the symptoms, but the structural issues that affect the systems that produce them. So we need to look at it and create outcomes that are based on systems, provide incentives that will shape behaviors, and also put in place governance systems that are aligned or will help determine accountability in a way that is measurable. Resource flows are very important to determine in order to be able to establish capabilities and where necessary adjust in the EB sense. So it is very important to consider stewardship as one of the pillars of this continuous framework cycle. And doing that, there are a couple of questions that you need to look at or reflection issues that you need to consider to be able to be on track and not miss the central theme or the issue that has to be improved. First one is what conditions are made practicable by this outcome. You need to look at those conditions because practicality is very important. You also need to look at the structures that needs to be redesigned and what incentives that are misaligned. Are decisions clear or not clear? What capacities that you have to build? And what adjustments that you are improving or suggesting, what does it really mean? Not only for you, but for the whole team that are involved in the continuous improvement process. It is important to consider that when leaders adjust systems, or we all adjust or work towards adjusting systems, continuous improvement is sustained. And learning outcomes are embedded because everybody learns and the feedback loop feeds into what is happening. And with such an approach, what you notice is organically the organization will evolve. Continuous improvement will reach a different state. And this is because adjustments are being done based on lessons that will create permanent or near permanent changes. And this is the difference between progress, temporary progress, and systemic transformation as components of continuous improvement. The SiBI improvement cycle, it's a tool that I've just outlined here. So here is the full SiBI improvement cycle. Again, sense, interpret, decide, and adjust. It is a leadership tool that is grounded on perception, meaning, judgment, stewardship. Just be reminded that it is not a compliance tool. It is an improvement or an awareness tool. And this is because improvement, as we all know it, evolves with time and with action and with systems. And improvement succeeds when it becomes interpretative and when leaders sense what is real and what is not and discern the truth between both. And interpretation then becomes more meaningful and decisions are taken with discipline. And where necessary adjustments are also made to be able to achieve the desired outcomes. So organizations stop repeating cycles and start maturing their systems. If they adapt the SiBI improvement cycle or the SiBI improvement posture. Small insights, when applied well, will be able to create a big impact. I hope you enjoyed this session on the SiBI improvement cycle. If this triggered an issue or a quest for a deeper analysis or reflection on similar things, please stay tuned. Subscribe to SiBI Insights and you get more out of it. Until then, stay thoughtful, stay grounded, and keep improving because continuous improvement is an evolving process. See you in the next episode.